Any company for that matter, across the globe functions mainly for one. Now, profit, though, seems a very simple word. It's just profit. But however, the way it is identified, the way it is analyzed, and the way it is used for comparison matters a lot in terms of companies' financial health or companies' progress. I'm sure a lot of you over here would be a part of trading or you'd be trading stocks, mutual funds, etc. So the first thing that all of us would look into is whether the company is in profit or loss. Now, while it is easy for us to say companies making profit, companies making loss, what are the things that goes behind it, and how we as a WFM analysts can influence the financial health of a company? That's exactly the agenda of this masterclass. So let's go forward. Let's go to the next one. So first, before we start, let's understand briefly. We don't have to spend a lot of time over here because all of us over here are from WFM. So the main definition of WFM is the right people at right skill at the right time. So that's the main definition, as we all know. But something which we need to understand is this new era of WFM, where apart from getting the right people at the right skill at the right time, it is very important for us to know whether or not we are getting them at the right cost. So the cost part, we are going to discuss further. We're going to drill down how we're going to optimize and how we can leverage multiple options to get the cost down or get the revenue up. That is there in the upcoming slide. But as a WFM function, this is what is the definition as we all know. Now, WFM compromises of a certain cycle, starts from forecasting, scheduling, planning, reporting, RTA, MIS, and analytics. Again, it goes back to forecasting. So here we have the complete control of how the workforce management functions within the company. The main output of workforce management is headcount. That's the whole idea of behind the WF, right? To have a right amount of headcount. This headcount is what translates into cost or optimization of cost, because in the as we all know, 60 to 70% of an organization's cost is coming from the headcount or the man. So that is why WF workforce management is important. Now let's look at the details on how we can leverage and how we can optimize the cost structure or the revenue structure of an organization. But before that, since this is inclusive, since we are talking about finances, we need to know what does finance also do in a company. So that is there in the next slide. If you go to the next slide. So now finance. Finance is a huge, there are multiple parts in finance, multiple branches in finance. But on the overall, on a high level standpoint, a CFO is the head of finance, as we all know. CFO controls mainly three things. One is the controllership. The controllership takes care of accounting, taxes, all the reporting, and then a few other liabilities, payment, etc. Then comes the corporate finance. Corporate finance mainly works with merger acquisitions, raising working capital either through liquidity or through equity and debts, banking relationship. These are the things which corporate finances take care of. And then next is the FP&A. I'm sure many of you over here from WFM, you would have already spoken to financial analysts where you might have reviewed the profit and loss statement or how much is the gross margin of your processes that you are handling. Those kind of roles are taken up by the FP&A. So here we are going to discuss in detail about FP&A because from there we will continue further. What's the role of FP&A and how is that we are going to uh, uh, how is that we are going to implement or influence about that. So the next slide, please. So FP&A, financial planning and analysis. So planning analysis answers most of the questions. So FP&A takes care of budgeting, long range manpower. I'm talking about 5 years to 10 years manpower planning, and then pricing strategy, whether or not we are priced according to the market comparison. Is our price competitive enough? Are we going to make enough margin with this price? So you might have handled processes which has per hour price or per connect minute price. Those prices are derived using a forecasting basis, and that is what is called as pricing strategy. Along with that, obviously reporting is done. They also look at operational KPIs, whether or not to figure out if there is a reward and penalty metrics. So then apart from variance analysis, the FP&A team also do the trend analysis on and predictive analysis. The trend analysis is mainly how was the feature, how was the past prediction, how can we leverage that, and how the future would look like. Just like the way WFM does the capacity planning, there is a certain planning in finance also. If we go to the next slide. So now I want to talk a little bit more about what is mentioned in the screen, the three core financial statements. Any company's financial health can be gauged, can be analyzed, can be comparable using only these three financial statements. Now, what is company's net value, whether the company is worth investing or not? This is something which is analyzed in the share market. They look at the balance sheet. Balance sheet talks about everything. How much is the equity? How much is the debt that company owes? How much the company is earning currently? How much the company may earn? How the stock price can vary because of this? All these things can be analyzed using the balance statement. Now, the inputs of balance statement has to come from the income statement, which is subjected to process, where the actual revenue comes from. What is your production revenue? What is the revenue that we're generating out of handling calls or handling tickets? That is a part of income statement. How much are we billing for the training? That is a part of the income statement. How much salary are we paying? How much OT are we paying? How many support staff do we have for whom we are paying salary? How many seats do we have for which we have paid some money? What is the the rent cost, utility cost, power, water charges, etc. All these things put together will be a part of income statement, and then you get a margin. After you would from the revenue, you deduct all your expenses, you get what is called the profit. That profit flows into the balance sheet. Depending on that particular profit, the share value in the market of a particular company, if it is there in the share value, the share market changes. Along with that, other statements such as equity statements, such as accounts payable statements, accounts receivable statements, those also comes into picture. But all those things are part of the balance sheet. Now, yeah, we have the income sheet, we have the balance sheet. Obviously, we can gauge the company's financial health from these two. But the third and the most important thing is the cash flow statement. Now, we would have invoiced the client. Let's say $100,000. We have already invoiced the client, but has the client paid immediately, or when the client is expecting to pay? That is something is what is cash flow statement. Income statement, balance sheet will tell you how much revenue you have earned or how much revenue you have marked. Cash flow statement will exactly tell you how much revenue is actually converted into cash. Out of 100,000 K, the client might have paid only 70,000. The remaining could be a balance. So the cash flow statement will tell you how much cash exactly the company has in its fund. Now that's very important because basis that only we can pay the salaries and other expenses. So these three core financial statement modeling is a separate course altogether where people from the financial domain, they get into in-depth analysis of all the three financial statement, look at step by step, analyze each and every line item, and then they learn modeling all. Apart from just understanding the company's financial health and just understanding the cash flow reserve, these will also be helpful in terms of understanding whether or not a company can acquire another company or whether or not a company can merge with other company. The major M&A deals, the taxations, the legality part of it, all those things will come from these three financial statements. So in finance, in a company, the whole company is balanced on these three statements only. So next slide, please. Now, out of these three, we are going to look only at income statement. Obviously, the other two is huge, and whatever we do in income statement is what goes as an input in the other. So therefore, we need to figure out how a WFM analyst or a WFM team in an organization influences the income statement and thus the finance of the company. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, I've just shown sample statements over here just for us to understand how the income statement is generated and how that goes into balance and cash flow. So let's look at it. On the left side, you see the income statement for a certain financial year. We have revenues and we have the cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold is broken up into further slide, and that is where we're going to discuss more. And then you have all your other expenses called SG&A and taxes, and then you have net profit. This net profit goes into balance sheet, which is highlighted in yellow. So a balance sheet equation is assets should be equal to liability on the equity, both put together. So total liabilities should be always equal to total assets. So whatever the customer or whatever the company value is over here, if we can just figure out, if we just look at the number, 266,000 is the company's total liability or the total asset, out of which we are supposed to pay, we are in debt of 53,000, which means whatever the balance is the net value of the company. So the net value of company is around 210,000, let's say 210K. However, if you look at the cash flow statement, the net profit was completely paid out of this. And we had to pay 9,000 to some working capital. The overall cash, though the company's net profit is 210K, the cash that is there in fund is only 32,000, using which we can pay the salary for the next month, which means this is a very poor financial health. If you look at the cost of goods sold in the income statement, that itself is coming up to 48,000. So having only 33,000 and having an expense of 48,000, which means the company has to raise some capital. That means the company is not performing well. They may have to probably cut down manpower or maybe cut down some costs. I'm sure you would have seen a lot of posts in LinkedIn where Amazon and other companies are laying off. This is an example of that, an illustrated example of how a company's financial health can be easily understood just by looking at these. I hope this is making sense to you all. So though you may not have access to look at balance sheet and cash flow statement of the companies at overall level, you may still have access to look at the income statement at a process level for you. So that gets compiled into a company level and then further goes into other statements and other actions. So this is a sample, and using the sample, this is how an example of how we can gauge the financial health of a company. Now let's look at the basics of P&L statement. The income statement is also called as P&L. P&L stands for profit and loss. Obviously, the income statement will let us know whether or not we are in profit or loss. So there are only two sides of it, revenue and cost. The simplest equation is revenue minus cost equal to margin or the profit. But in the revenue section, we may have multiple subsections. I have mentioned the main three over here, the operating revenue or the production revenue, which comes mainly from our production. Depending on your billing model, it could be per call or per connect minute or per hour or per FTE, whatever billing model you're operating. That's the operating revenue or production revenue. Then the training revenue, whatever training you are done, depending on your contract with your client, you may have the leverage to build the training. And if you have that leverage, that becomes the part of training revenue. Other revenues can be multiple, sometimes overtime, sometimes billing support staff at a particular dollar value, billing special project works, temporary works at a particular dollar value. These could be a part of other revenue. But however, in cost, in any company, in any organization, it could be either BPO or it could be IT industries, it could be production industry, manufacturing industry, irrespective of it. The cost is broadly classified into three types: manpower cost, technical cost, and service delivery cost. Now, the major difference is in BPO, we call it as technical cost. In IT, we call it as technical cost. Whereas in product-based company, they will call it as PP&E cost, which means plant and equipment costs. That's the only rename of that's the name convention of tech cost. Service delivery cost includes your infrastructure cost, all the rents, utilities, pantry services, admin services, all these things are part of the service delivery cost. So net cost in any organization is mainly or broadly classified into these three categories: manpower cost, technical cost, and service delivery cost. Let's go further. Okay, so now let's look more into profit and loss statement. Let's look in-depth details of profit and loss statement and breakup of each section. Now, if you look at the left side, that's the whole profit and loss statement or the income statement for a particular financial year. The production revenue is 365K, which was generated for that particular year. Training revenue was 9,600. We had certain rewards of 9,000 and we had penalty of 3,000. So the net revenue the company generated was 380K. Now, out of this, in the expenses, advisor salary, support salary, both put together forms manpower. So we have the salaries mentioned over here, and you can see that only the manpower cost is 60%, 61 percentage over here of the overall revenue. This is mentioned as percentage of revenue. So that is why you see the total as 732.35 and the remaining 27.65 becomes the gross. So there is the manpower cost, the tech cost, and the service delivery cost. Now, though I have not given the breakup of service delivery cost, let's look at the breakup of other sections. Now, let's look at advisor salary. I have given a very clear illustration on how the salary breakup was considered for advisor. Now, monthly volume, AHT in seconds, occupancy, which is the output of per land, and then we calculate the required billability. Now, over here, monthly volume and occupancy is something which is still in our control. Monthly volume can be client forecasted or can be forecasted internally too. But occupancy is completely in our control. So using this, we calculate what is going to be the billable FTE. Shrinkage again is in our control. So now we know what is the required headcount for the complete advisor area. We know what's the average CTC. Here I have mentioned the CTC and the cost in terms of INR, but I've converted that to USD using the Forex foreign exchange rate. Now, for any country, any geography, the cost can be expressed in local currency, but at the end, it has to be converted to USD to look at the international standard and to have a standard format across accounting. Now, this forms 193, which is a part of the advisor salary, which is going up in the income statement. Now, support salary. Base is 20, 35, 41 headcount. We have certain span of control, certain CTC for each of the support span that is considered over here. Obviously, I've just given an example of only 4 roles. We may have additional roles too. So all those roles put together, whatever salary is coming in picture, that is going to be your overall support salary in terms of the USD. And the third one is the technical cost. Technical cost, number of seats. I have taken 28, though the required headcount is 41. That's purely because of the hours of operation and the seat utilization, which is mentioned. The capital expenditure and operational expenditure. These are the two major parts of the technical cost. Now, let me explain what is CapEx and what is OpEx. OpEx can be any cost which is recurring either monthly or annually. For example, software license cost, rent and utility cost for the technical infrastructure, and then annual maintenance charges, Office 365 license, Teams license, Zoom license. All these licenses are renewed annually, just like our Amazon Prime or Netflix, which is monthly or annual. That which is a recurring cost is called as operational expenditure. Capital expenditure or CapEx are one-time investment required for us to run the organization or run the process. For example, network, storage devices, servers, and then computers, laptops, systems, desktops, monitors, headsets. All these things are one time. We don't purchase systems every year unless it is gone or something. So this is called as capital expenditure. Now, capital expenditure obviously at the first month while starting the process will be very high because we'll bring some 100 systems, or in this case we'll bring 28 systems, and for those 28 systems we'll get a storage, we'll have to get a server, we'll have to get internet connections, lease line connections, all those things put together. Obviously the first month's investment will be very high. You will not have that much of revenue. Therefore, for us to have an equal distribution of that particular investment, capital expenditure, The capital expenditure is divided equally until the duration of the contract. Now, let us say the contract or the SOW duration is only for 3 years. Post 3 years, you may renew it or you may continue with the same rate or you may terminate the contract. That is dependent on your performance. Now, let's just say the contract duration is for 3 years, which means the capital expenditure of $1,000, which we had invested initially, is divided by 3 years or 36 months to get a monthly accounting or an annual accounting. In this way, what we do is we equally distribute the cost and take the load on the gross margin at a lesser level rather than taking the complete load in the first. This method of dividing it equally and spreading it across to have an adjustable profit is called as amortization. So that is what I mentioned. So this is done by the finance team and the IT team too. IT team will give us what's the overall requirement and what's the overall capital expenditure that they have already spent. Now remember, the money is already spent. It's not that we are paying EMI over. It's like kind of a credit card. Let's just say that. You have already swiped and bought a phone from credit card. Now you're just paying EMI for it. Here the money is already spent. You're just dividing it and spreading it across the accounting period to have a lower impact without any interest. And this will also be helpful in terms of taxation for a company where the profit is reduced compared to first month to second. So that's the importance of amortization, and this comes purely in two things. One is the technical cost, the second one is the service delivery cost. In terms of service delivery cost, obviously to run the process, you will have to have a building, you will have to have a floor, which means you will have to pay advance or rent, or you will have to own the building. Either of these. It's huge amount. One time capital expenditure. Obviously, you will have to divide that and spread it across the accounting period or the contract duration. So in a P&L statement, the only two places where amortization is included is tech cost and service delivery cost. Now, what we are essentially doing over here is the capital expenditure of complete $1,000 is spread across, and we have taken it. But what if the company, small scale companies, in terms of machineries, in terms of product based companies, they will have a plan to resell the equipment. So that means they will have a certain salvage value. Here we have not considered anything. $1,000, 3 years, $1,000 is gone. No use of that. In product based companies, out of $1,000, after 3 years, they may resell it for $200. So instead of taking the complete cost of $1,000, they will take the cost of only $800, considering that they can earn the remaining $200 by selling the equipment after the 3 years contract, after the salvage life or whatever. That concept is known as depreciation. You would have heard the word depreciation a lot. So that's the actual meaning of depreciation. There are 3 to 4 methods on how you can depreciate a particular amount or a particular product or equipment. So that is a part of financial strategies or accounting basics. So this is the breakup of profit and loss. Now here, let's see how you and me as a WFM can influence and how we can change the way the margin is calculated or the margin is produced. Now, before we go to the next slide, remember the margin, some places where we have control is only up to gross margin. After gross margin, you have operating margin and the net margin, for which we can't control. It's purely from a corporate perspective. As a WFM or even as a process, even if you have a process leader who is a AVP or a VP, even they can't control whatever happens after the gross margin. So the gross margin, 27.65%, what I have mentioned over here, that is what we can have some control over. So there could be only two things to control. Either increase the revenue. If you want to increase the gross margin, we either increase the revenue or reduce the cost. These are only two things, right? Revenue minus cost is gross margin. So you either increase one or decrease the other. So let's see how we can do that. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, optimization of cost. So let's start from It starts from basics of forecasting. So the very first step for us to calculate anything is to find out what is the manpower requirement, what is the effort in terms of hours that is required for us to run the process. Obviously, the first step is forecasting. The way you forecast matters a lot in terms of controlling the headcount. Let's say the forecasting accuracy, you have selected two models. Model one, let's call it as triple exponential smoothing. Model two, let's say you have selected the ARIMA model. Now, these two models, you have based your forecast and this is the historical data, and you've got a very good forecasting accuracy for both of it. Obviously, we will select the model which has the highest accuracy and go further with the trend. But however, on the real time basis, if that forecast is not producing enough accuracy that we had got while we were forecasting, we'll have to readjust the forecast accordingly. All these things are part of forecast. Now, we have separate courses on all the forecasting areas, which is taught separately with practical examples. So that is a complete separate course that we have where we teach around 20 to 25 models of forecasting. The first step is forecasting. Now, you either forecast volume or you forecast manpower. If you have to forecast manpower, historically, you need to have how much FTE was locked, how much FTE was required. And obviously, if you have to find out how much FTE was required, again, you need to drill down back to volume. Forecasting HT is fairly simple. You can take the previous trend, look at the buckets of tenuity of the people, and look at the recent buckets of tenuity of people, and then you can get the AHT accordingly. Now, for us to calculate manpower, we need volume, we need AHT, we need shrinkage, we need occupancy. Now, shrinkage, AHT, and occupancy can follow the past trend. We can either put a weighted average method or we can try to correlate with other forecasting volumes, and then we can see whether the correlation is good or not. Probably do a linear regression between the volume and the occupancy, or you put the or you once you focus the volume, break it down to interval level, put it in a blank, and then get the occupancy as an output if you have inbound and chat process. But focusing volume requires statistical understanding. You cannot just take a simple average of the last 4 months or weighted average of the last 4 months and their forecast. You will have to understand what is the previous trend. Was there any seasonality? Was there any level? Is the volume growing? Is the volume decreasing? If it's decreasing, why is it decreasing? Is there any automation in the volume? If the client is providing the log to forecast, and if it is not matching with our internal forecast, we can question back to client. Look, you have given me a certain volume, X number of volume, but when I am forecasting using the past trend, I am getting Y number of volume. Why is there a difference? Now, when the client logs the forecast, what are the things the client may take into consideration? The first thing, they allocated budget for your company. Now, let's say I am the client and I have outsourced my process to you. I will have a certain budget for your company. The client knows what's the billing rate, let's say $10 an hour, example. Now, the client will say, okay, if I give X number of volume, they may have a requirement of this much FTE. If they have requirement of this much FTE, and then I can get an invoice of X number of dollars. Is this higher than my budget or is this lower than? It is higher. Okay, then let's reduce the lock volume and give it to other vendor. Is it lower than budget? Okay, then let's increase the lock volume and reduce it from other. On a competitive business, this is how it runs. But increasing the lock volume, reducing the lock volume also has other factors. If I increase the lock volume from X to Y, do they have enough FTE to handle it? How is the performance in terms of service level? How is the performance in terms of handle? How is their operational performance? Whether are they meeting FCR? Is the CSAT good? Is the NPS good? All these things will fall into picture when giving a log to forecast volume for a particular vendor. Now, if you are doing internal forecast, if we have to manage internally, then we can do a statistical analysis. Like I said, either you do triple expenses smoothing or ARIMA method, or a simple live method, or simple linear regression method. So We can follow either of this model, look at the forecasting error or the accuracy, compare the models, then look at the p-value, do a hypothesis testing, and understand whether this forecasting is good or that decision matters a lot because that is the first step to understand the manpower required. We did see in the previous slides, manpower cost alone is coming up to 60% of the revenue. 60 out of the 60% of the revenue, advisor salary is alone is 50%. Remaining 10% is from support salary. Where is the support derived from? Support is derived from the advisor account, right? Depending on the number of headcount, you decide how many team leaders are required, how many quality analysts are required, how many operations, depending on the span of control, how many ops managers are required, how many AMs are required. If it's a small process, you may not have an ops manager you dedicated, you can have them shared across processes. What if it's a big process, 500, 600 FTEs? Then you will have more number of costs. I just considered a QA because it's just a 28 to 45 FTEs business. If I have 400, 500 FTEs business, then I have to consider the QA team lead. I have to consider QA assistant manager. I have to consider trainer, training assistant manager. Multiple supports of span will come into picture depending on the size of the business. Who decides the size of the business? The volume. Who decides the volume? WFM. The WFM can be either from a vendor perspective or from a client perspective. Now, from a client perspective, also when they are forecasting the locked volume, obviously they would have used some statistical tools. Based on that, they are using the market strategy to lock the volume. Now, the base number to get the forecasted volume is your forecasting models. Either you do it from vendor side or client side, it is the same. So that's the first step of influencing a finance of the company, doing a proper focus. Now we're just trying to figure out how all we can optimize the process. Now let's say you are currently running a process where your forecasting accuracy is only 70%. How you can compare, you have the client forecast, you're looking at the actual volume, then obviously you would have some intraday report which will tell you what was the offer to forecast percentage, what was the handle to forecast percentage. Offer to forecast is a direct measure of forecasting accuracy. If it is very low, we can probably renegotiate. You are staffing for 100%, but the volume is coming only for 70%, which means unless it's not an FTE model, if it's a transaction model or per call model, though you are paying for 100% of the people, you are generating only 70% of the revenue. Which means automatically your revenue is decreasing, your cost is increasing, the profit will definitely come down. It may not be 27%, or it may not be up to the company's standard or expectation. So better forecasting will yield better result and optimization of the headcount. Obviously, while forecasting, we are not compromising on the quality. Keeping the quality in mind, we have to give a better forecast. Now, after we forecast, obviously the next is actually the capacity planning, but I have not included over here because forecasting talks both about volume and headcount. Either you do headcount forecasting, which is what is done in capacity planning, right? Once you have the volume, you forecast how much headcount is required for the future, and you make a plan accordingly. But for you to make a plan, you need to have linkage and occupancy. Now, occupancy can be derived. That is what is the next step in scheduling. Occupancy can be derived in multiple factors. If it's in back office, you may need. You don't have to use Erlang if it has a 24-hour stat or 48 hours stat. You can go with maybe 95% or 85% occupancy if it's a back office process. But if it's a front office process like inbound, chats, social media, where you have a certain service level, like 80% in 30 seconds, or ASA 45 seconds, and then social media you will have to reply within half an hour, which is again ASA of 30 minutes, right? These kind of processes, which is called as immediate queue requirement, we will have to use the Erlang for us to find out what's the optimized occupancy. Now, while scheduling, you can find out different options. For example, if you know Erlang, I'm sure most of you have worked on this. The first thing is you put the volume, the forecasted volume at an interval level. Once you put the interval level volume using the AC, you use Erlang to calculate what is the requirement without any snippets. This is the required number of FT, or you either add linkage or you negative scheduling, it's one and the same. Next is base is the requirement. We prepare a scheduling skeleton and then we come up with the interval level scheduled number without any changes. We compare these two and prepare a table called as over under table. Now, basis this, you can identify what is going to be the achievable service level and what is going to be the occupancy. Now, obviously, here one manual input is the way we schedule. That will define what is the occupancy. Now, we have IEX, we have Aspect, we have tools which does this automatically. All you have to do is just let them know number of people, preferred shift for those people, and then it will put everything accordingly and automatically calculate. This is exactly what the tool does. Some of us do it in Excel, and some of us use the tool tools. The output of the optimized occupancy with a better OU and achieving the service level, optimize the scheduling by achieving the service level will be the occupancy. Now, the optimized occupancy will result in the number of headcount that we require. For the same number of quality, if your occupancy is 70%, you may require, let's say, X number. But if you optimize or increase the occupancy to 75, that means you're reducing the headcount to the same amount of volume. Which means here in this equation, the revenue remains the same, but we are reducing the cost by reducing the headcount. How did we reduce the headcount? By optimizing the occupancy. And how did we optimize the occupancy? By doing proper scheduling, better scheduling techniques. How are we going to gauge it? Scheduling accuracy and using different tools. If you don't have a tool, probably you can use you can try to get tools to figure out whether it is giving better optimization. And then these are the parts. Now, one more important part is tech cost. Tech cost tells us how many seats is required, and we calculate cost per seat. Now, when in the earlier example, I had showed 45 headcount but 28 seats. That means a WFM team gave us an SC that okay, even if I have 45 headcount, you can have only 28 seats because of the way we're going to schedule. Again, seat utilization is an output of scheduling. But obviously, if we have to derive proper seat utilization, the hours of operation, the way the interval pattern is coming up, all these things matter. If the hours of operation is just 9 hours Monday to Friday, there is nothing much we can do in terms of seat utilization. We'll have to provide seat for everyone, so the seat utilization will be 1:2. But if it's 24 hours and if it's a proper bell curve, we can have a good scheduling to get the seat utilization up to 1.6 or 1.8. If it's a back office, we can do split shifts, morning shifts and night shifts, and we can get this seat utilization up to 2. If the data is 24 hours or 8 hours, or even 4 hours, 8 hours. So depending upon the way we schedule people, we get seat utilization. The better the seat utilization, the lower the cost of the tech. Remember, the revenue in this equation is still the same. Revenue has not changed. We just optimize the schedule, increase the occupancy, reduce the manpower requirement. While we optimize the schedule, we increase the SU, reduce the seat requirement. So we reduce the manpower cost, we reduce the tech cost. While we reduce the agent requirement, support requirement will also go down because it is running in span. So out of the three costs, service delivery cost, tech cost, and agent cost, we are able to reduce these two just by forecasting and scheduling. Just by having a very good accuracy compared to your previous result. If we get that in place, that's more than enough to control the cost of the future. Now, obviously, if we have to do forecast, we did forecasting, we did scheduling, all these are still in planning. This has to be implemented. The only way we can implement is better real-time monitoring. Sorry. So again, we can use tools, we can use advanced techniques. Nowadays, we have AI robotics to control the RTA monitoring, which will help us to control the leakages in terms of in-office linkage, in terms of break exceeds, in terms of schedule adherence. If we have better schedule adherence, that means we have better productivity, better utilization of energy. All these things can be done only through. Again, occupancy, if we are forecasting using the past trend will be controlled only by an RTA by leveraging the avail time. Either when you have high avail, you can either send them for PTO, again reducing the cost over here, and then either send them for billable shrinkage. Again, we are increasing the revenue over here by sending them to billable shrinkage. And we are creating an occupancy called synthetic occupancy. The reason why I'm calling synthetic is we are reducing the number of people and reducing the avail time manually, which means we are doing it synthetically. So once the avail time reduces, obviously the occupancy increases. And if an occupancy for a particular week is increased, and if you're using the trend for that particular week, obviously, if you're taking the, let's say, weighted average of 4 weeks, if you're taking weighted average of occupancy of 4 weeks, and if 1 week has a higher occupancy, the result of the weighted average will also be a little higher. So again, we are optimizing the occupancy by doing better real-time. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is bill to pay ratios, or how we are utilizing the people and how we are, how much productivity that we're getting out of people. That way we can leverage our real-time monitoring to have increased productivity. So even if you have 100 people, if you're productive only for 50 to 60%, then again we are not generating enough revenue, but we are paying the cost. But if we have 100 people and if we have enough, if we have a very good tight real-time monitoring, and if we are increasing the productivity from 60% to let's say 90% also, that means the revenue is increasing, but the cost is still the same. We are still paying for the same 100, but we are just increasing the revenue by doing the tight real-time monitoring. So the equation is very simple: revenue minus cost equal to profit. We are just trying to leverage multiple things within revenue, within cost, and how we can work from a WFM standpoint to optimize all these things. And the last one is obviously the reporting and analytics. If the forecaster has to forecast using the historical trend, that means there has to be certain reports available. I'm sure many of the WFM folks over here will also do invoices for your processes, month-end invoices, accrual invoices. So when you're doing invoices, you also look at the MIS reports to find out how many hours we logged, how many hours we clocked, and then what is the total number of calls which is answered, what was the AHT. All those things comes in the reporting standpoint. Whether we have to pay a penalty or will we get any reward, this is the operational metrics. Again, comes from MIS report. So we use this report to analyze for any hidden patterns in terms of KPIs or in terms of volume trends. Is there any particular interval where we are using so much of volume? Let's look at interval-based data, compare it, and try to find out if there is any pattern. Should we do scheduling in a better pattern, or should we change something in the scheduling? How can we achieve service level, or how can we achieve reduce abandon percentage in these particular days? If we have all these things, data is the only key to answer these questions. So data comes from our reporting. All these four pillars, major pillars, is controlled by workforce management. We are the owners of forecasting, scheduling, and RT and reporting. So I hope I'm making sense with the way how we are going to control the different aspects and how is that going to impact in the financial statements. Okay, there is a question. Erlang formula is mostly used when deciding the required number of agents. How can we incorporate a service while planning for monthly capacity? Good question. Now, if you are using Erlang to calculate your requirement at a weekly level, you can also do it at a monthly level. That monthly occupancy for a particular volume, let's say 20,000 is your monthly volume, you use the 20,000, broke it down into interval level, and then you got the Erlang occupancy as let's say 70%. Obviously, you have past trend. You can have two columns. One is achieved occupancy, one was projected occupancy. Look at the correlation between volume and the occupancies. You will get a correlation. If the correlation is good, you can use the correlation equation or the regression equation to find out what's going to be the future occupancy just by inputting the one. That's one way. Second way is once you have the future forecast, the scheduling can be changed. You already have a scheduling template. You already took the occupancy from there. So every month you can input the volume and you can get the occupancy as a result. But for this, you need to do some background work in creating the monthly level land calculations and a sample scheduling shell to figure out this is how the scheduling could be if I have this much of volume. That way you can get the occupancy rate. Or like I said, look at the past trend, take a simple weighted average depending on if the volume trend is not changing that much. If the volume trend for this month compared to previous month is just between plus or minus 10%, then the occupancy can still be the same. A little bit of variances of 0.5 to 1% can be still managed. But if the volume variation is too high, then you will have to increase the occupancy if you have the same number of agents. Again, the third thing which will impact the occupancy is how many number of agents you may have at that point of time. This month is January. I am trying to forecast for April. I have a hiring batch in the month of March. And if I have that hiring batch, I have 100 agents now. I am hiring 40 people, out of which I am expecting 30 people to graduate. So which means I'll have 130 people. If the volume remains the same, I have 100. In the 3 months, I am expecting the attrition of 10 people, which means net I will have 120 people. So today I am scheduling for 100. For April, I'll schedule for 120. So how the occupancy will vary if the volume remains the same. This kind of correlation analysis we'll have to do in terms of scheduling, which in turn goes into planning, and obviously it comes from forecasting. So you will have to, if you're doing scheduling alone, you will have to collaborate with the planning team and collectively find a solution. Or if you already have a process set to find out what's the future, then probably check whether it is actually working or not, whether it is adaptable. Is there something that we can do to increase it or decrease it, to optimize it further? Those are the things that we can look at. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, sir. Okay, now next thing is revenue and cost per headcount. Now, obviously, we did everything in terms of workforce management. Okay, we optimized the occupancy, we optimized the tech support, tech cost, everything we did. But how are you going to quantify whether or not it is impacting the finances, right? Obviously, if you don't have access to the profit and loss statement of the process, you will not be able to tell whether or not it is impacting. The best way to find out is what's the revenue or cost per headcount, right? Simplest formula. Let's talk about revenue per headcount. Total revenue by total. Obviously, you'll get to know the revenue because if you are doing the billing or if any of your team members are doing the invoices for that particular process, you will get to know what is the revenue that we are clocking. Now you know what's the headcount. The total revenue divided by total headcount will give you the revenue per headcount. Now this is a base point. Let's say for the month of January, this month, my capacity plan has a revenue per headcount of $1,500 per month. Next month, the revenue per headcount, basis my projection, should also be 1,500, right? But it became 1,400. $100 reduction in revenue per headcount. Why is it happening? What could be the possible reasons? Now, let's look at the formula. Total revenue, total. So between Jan and Feb, there could be only two things which can change: either revenue or headcount. Either the revenue has decreased or headcount has increased. Now, from 1,500 to 1,400, if the revenue remains the same and if the headcount increases, obviously the revenue per headcount will also come. Or if the headcount remains the same and the revenue decreases, revenue per headcount is coming down. Now, for the same revenue, if the headcount is increasing, that means why are we doing it? Is there any special requirement? If there is any special project for which we are hiring additional headcount, then that revenue is not getting calculated. Therefore, our revenue per headcount is showing low. Now, usually in e-commerce business, usually if you are handling healthcare businesses, you will have a certain seasonality at a yearly level. E-commerce, usually when there is a mega sales happening, or in healthcare, if there is a open enrollment for the insurance which is happening, these are the times where the volume is expected to go very high. So considering the volume can go to 2x, 3x of what we are currently handling, we may not have capability to hire everyone at the same time. So operationally, what we will design is from a capacity planning standpoint. Okay, we need 100 additional headcount. We cannot hire whole 100 within a month. So let's break it into 2 to 3 months. So in that way, if we are doing this, the revenue is still remaining the same, but we are hiring headcount which is not even required. But we are preparing for the peak to provide better services during the peak time. Now, all these things will form an analysis. Will try to help you to understand why the revenue is increasing or decreasing at a per headcount. If you look at it at the overall level, you may not be able to analyze and figure out what's the trend and what's the pattern. Now, if you go back and if you have a capacity planning running live, and if you can input revenue for each stream, and if you look at the past trend, and if you can find out what's the root cause analysis of the revenue varying that much, that is more than enough to understand. It will give you a very good insights on how the process is running. So obviously, I have revenue, I have cost per head at a per head count level. I deduct these two, I get to see my profit immediately. You don't even need to go to finance. But the cost part has to come from finance standpoint because we may not have the exact cost coming up because there are so many line items which goes into cost. I broadly classified the cost into three major categories, but within these three major categories, there are around 30 to 35 line items which comes with the cost. There are travel expenses, there are recruitment charges, there are training expenses, there are certification expenses, maintenance charges for the floor, and then there are telephony charges. There are security and ward expenses. There are pantry expenses. There are what do you say? There are power expenses, rent, utility. There's so many expenses which we may not know from a WFM. It has to come from the finance because they will have the process set up to get the records of each and every expenses. So revenue per headcount, total revenue divided by total headcount. So here the important concept is you may have revenue 1500 to 1400, but if your company process A to process B, and process A is doing 1500, process B is doing 1200, doesn't mean that process A is doing better, right? So you will have to express this in terms of percentage to have a proper gauging, proper comparison between process to process, LOBs to LOBs. That is called bill to pay ratio. Again, the formula is very simple. How much hours we are total billing. So billed hours can be calculated in multiple situations. If it's an hourly billing, direct production hour that you're billing. If it's per minute billing, then total minutes that you're billing, which is calls into AHT. If your total calls to this billing, again you can calculate the manpower depending on the total calls that you're billing. So billed hours by paid hours using the bill to pay. Now, in geographies or in countries where the wages are paid at a per hour basis, I think, for example, let's say US, Jamaica. So there the wages go in per hour. So these kind of places, the cost control is much easier because you can give VTOs, you can give unpaid leaves, etc. to control the cost. But in geographies, for example, India, you don't have a hourly wage. You have a fixed annual wage. Whether or not you go to company you work, you still get paid for that. That is the problem. So we may not be able to optimize the cost completely depending on the labor laws and other government laws too. There is certain restrictions over there. But however, uh, the bill to pay ratio, which is total billed hours by total paid hours, will give you the output in terms of percentage, which can be used to compare the process to a different process. Now, at a CEO, CFOs, and the executive levels, they don't look at the operational KPIs, how much revenue you're making. They would simply look at bill to pay ratio. They would simply look at what is the gross margin that is. These two are more than enough to figure out whether the process is running good or not. And obviously, they may look at the operational KPIs, whether or not we are paying penalties, whether or not we are paying rewards, etc. And the other way WFM can control the rewards and penalty also depends upon the way the R&D matrix is designed. If you have a penalty on AHT, We, from a real-time monitoring, can control the hold, STW, etc. to reduce the AHT. We can call out, we can send alerts, etc. to do those things. So these ways, the small things that we do can affect, can multiply, can increase the profit of the company without our knowledge. We will not even be aware of it. But however, if we have to gauge it, understand the trend, then revenue per head count, cost per head count will give you a very good understanding on how are we gauging it. This can also be a KPI for WFM. When I was a scheduler, when I was a planner, revenue per head count, if it's varying, if the revenue per head count is not varying between minus 20% to plus 20%, that means I have met my KPI. If it's varying more than that, I'll have to be responsible for explaining why it is varying. If it's logical explanation, then yes, I can get an exception. If it's not logical, then I don't meet that KPI for that month. So there's a KPI for me, revenue per head count, when I was a planner 5, 6 years back. Okay, so obviously, if you have explainable reasons why revenue per head count is changing between months, like I said, seasonality, we are hiring early to to mitigate the risk of not hiring, unable to hire. If you're doing that, if you're creating a pool, if you're creating a bench, uh, that is still logical. You're doing it for business purposes, considering future in mind, which strategy is something which is considered in mind. In some places, instead of revenue per head count, cost per head count is also kept as a KPI. But if you have to keep this is mainly in captive centers. In captive centers, you don't have revenue, obviously, because you are servicing your own product. So it's only cost. So you will know all the cost items. If you're increasing the headcount, obviously the cost is increasing. And if you're decreasing the headcount, the cost is decreasing. So depending on that, cost per headcount mainly works from a captive workforce management standpoint. For example, Amazon. Right? Amazon is a very good example now. So they started laying off people because their cost per headcount increased. So there could be multiple reasons why they started laying off, why they did not consider this prior. So now, anyways, they are laying it off. But cost per headcount obviously is one reason. But they may have not looked into capacity planner to find out what is the cost per headcount. If I reduce it, how much is it going to be? They can just look at the financial statement, like I showed earlier. Okay, I'm not able to pay the expenses of the employee, which means I have to start laying off people. So if I lay off people, the next question is, can I generate the same revenue which I was generating earlier? If yes, that means my planning at the first place was wrong. I have hired excess people. If no, that means my planning was correct. If I am laying off people, that means my revenue will also reduce. So both are interrelated. So these two are very important metrics in terms of understanding whether or not we are doing it. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. So this is one topic which we wanted to discuss because I'm not sure how many of you are aware. Currently, US is under recession. Recession is a temporary cycle. It's not a permanent cycle. Uh, Recession is a cycle where the cash flow reduces, the purchasing power reduces, and the debt increases. So that is the economical level of a country, which can in turn affect the companies. What's the impact? Obviously, delayed cash flow. Now, just because we have recession, if the company says this, okay, we are not going to pay the salary for this month for you because we don't have enough cash, we are not going to stay quiet, right? And none of the company will do that unless it's a very small scale companies or medium scale companies. The big scale companies, the BPOs, they will still have to pay salary on time, irrespective of whether the customer is paying them or not. So, which requires cash. That is what cash flow statement tells us, how much reserve that we have. If we need to require cash, we need to earn cash. We can just invoice the person, we can invoice the client, but as the client really pay, that can delay in cash flow, for which I may have to raise the cash from somewhere else. Either I have to take loan from a bank to pay salary at a particular interest, which means I am lost at both the sides, which means I'm also paying additional interest which was not required. I'm also paying a salary which is actually required, but I don't have enough cash for for me to pay salary for. That's one thing. So if the delayed cash flow is happening, if you're not able to pay enough salary, They may freeze the hiring requirement because we don't have expenses fund. This happens especially in terms of support staff. Agents we may still hire because they are revenue generating. We still have to generate the revenue, but support staff especially gets freezed if there is no enough cash flow or if the profit is reducing. So if we even stop the agent hire, that means the manpower is again lower, which means again it's a lower revenue. That means again the cash flow is reduced. So I hope you're able to connect the dots over here, how it can happen, how the cycle works within the organization. What are the reasons of layoffs or reasons of recession is the main reason for layoffs, right? One of the prime reasons. But if the recession is something which can be forecast. It is a predictable recession. We can exactly tell that okay, in this financial year, maybe there could be a 1 or 2 quarter variance. We can have a recession. If you look at the economists, if you look at the stock market analysts, or if you look at the financial analysts of big banks or the government themselves, they are able to predict the recession. If the recession is predictable and if it is announced to public, that means from a workforce management standpoint, from a company strategical standpoint, we'll have to have correct manpower. If it's an improper planning of headcount, that means we have enough headcount, we have higher headcount, which is not required, layoffs starts happening. Many big companies are doing layoffs. You heard on the news. So it could be either of these reasons why they're doing layoffs. Obviously, they may not publicly accept this is what the exact reason that they're doing layoffs because of the image and the brand of the company. But if someone is there internal financially, at least the corporate finance level, they would know exactly where the layoff is happening because they will have access to the financial health of the companies. So it's not only from a WFM standpoint, even from a finance standpoint, if the revenue and the cash flow forecasting is not done properly without considering the market status. Now, I am a finance analyst. I am doing cash flow projections for the next financial year, and I haven't even considered recession. I am just going with this normal standard template. I just copy pasted the formula, it gave me certain output. I just use the output to take a decision. Cash flow, if the customer today is paying in 60 days after receiving the invoice, during recession, the customer may pay in 120 days, which means my cash flow should also reflect that. If the cash flow is reflecting that, I will get to know how much expenses that I may have, which in turn will be helpful for me to decide whether or not I should hire. If that hiring is going to happen, that will help us, the capacity planner, figure out whether or not we will have enough headcount or not. If we are not having enough headcount, from a scheduling standpoint, we can plan for overtime by paying obviously OT, but while while giving for overtime, unless the company is facing problem in terms of the operational KPIs. If the company is very standardized, if they're achieving the KPIs very well, usually there is a cost benefit analysis which is done while doing the OT. For example, I am getting OT done from 30 people for 1 hour. With this AHT, I may be able to handle 1,000 calls in that one. Just giving an example. If I handle 1,000 calls, this is my revenue that I'm going to generate for that 1,000 calls. And if I'm getting the OT done for these 30 people, I'll be paying this much of the amount. Cost benefit analysis. I am paying certain cost, I am generating revenue. Is the revenue higher than cost? Then yes, let's get the OT done. If the revenue is lower than cost, there comes other data points. I'll have to do the OT because I'm not paying service level. The client, I may have to pay that. So for me to meet the service level, I have to get the OT done. I don't have enough manpower. The existing agents may burn out, leading to a very high occupancy. And if the trend continues, it may lead to higher attrition. So all of us over here know attrition, the cost of attrition is higher than the cost of retention. So all these data points taken into consideration, a good WFM analyst who is trained, we should be able to analyze and put the financials into all this. Remember, whatever you do, quantifying is the best way to figure out whether or not you are doing good. And there's no best way to quantify than the expenses in the revenue. Dollar value quantification is the best way for a company, for organization, for a leader to take a decision. So try to get the skills in those ways where you can get to the impact of the dollar value if you're doing a particular strategy. So how WFM can influence in terms of precision? Obviously, identify reasons for employee turnover, which is attrition, and take collaborative steps with the other departments to reduce the attrition. Cross-skilling people. If you can cross-skill people between chat and voice, if you can cross-skill people between process A to process B, obviously you're optimizing the occupancy, you're using the agents at a better utilization, and obviously it's going to generate revenue in both the processes, but at the same cost. So cost remains the same. So as a WFM, I just want to end how we're going to do it. Now that I've given you all the high level overviews of how WFM can affect multiple places in terms of finances, in terms of P&L, and how the P&L affecting the P&L can affect the company's health by getting into balance statement, cash flow statement, how the cash flow statement can decide whether or not we can hire. All these strategies starts from workforce management. So the main, I mean, how the pillar of company is manpower. And fortunately, we are the owners of manpower. Without manpower, there is nothing we can do. So that is the power of workforce management, which can influence the company's financial health. So we spoke about multiple steps that we can do in terms of forecasting, planning, in terms of optimization of the costs, uh, how we can implement those. We can either check and do it, or we can do a trial basis and figure out whether or not it is implementing or not. Or you can also do some temporary projects to understand what is it going to happen if I do this. So those are the things which can actually influence the finances, which in turn influences the complete health of the company. Let's go to the next slide. So with that, I am going to end the session for today. Do let me know if you have any questions. But before that, if you want whatever we discussed, we also have courses where the complete statement is practically built with actual real world examples and working knowledges. If you want to get trained on those, please contact GWFM. Dr. Shiva will be able to let you know more about it. But thank you very much for your attention. Do let me know if there's any questions.